The National Sorry Day in Australia takes place on May 26th of every year since 1998.
This annual event exists so the Australian people can remember their wrongdoing in the past toward to Aboriginal population, most precisely toward the stolen generation.
The first public apology was made by Kevin Rudd, Australia's Prime Minister at the time, on February 3rd, 2008, on behalf of the Australian government.
The Sorry Day was implanted due to the suffering inflicted on the stolen generation by the Europeans for decades. Everything started when the Europeans colonized Australia. To be more precise, it was the English that first arrived in 1770. They were led by Captain James Cook. Since the beginning, they had prejudice against the Aborigines that were considered as inferior, which explains the conflict that lasted centuries between whites and Aborigines, especially due to land and ethnic problems.
The stolen generation is what we call the generation that were taken away from their families because their children were half-caste from 1890 to 1917. The NSW Aboriginal Protection Board gave in 1915 power to remove Aboriginal children from their homes without a court hearing. Children as young as babies were taken away from their family and sent to girl and boys' homes, foster families, or even
These children were usually sent to the Moore River settlements against their will so they could learn to live in the European society. They were raised until they were 18. When they became adult by law, they were released, but sadly, there were some moral and physical consequences on the stolen generation's life that changed them forever. The government saw the Aboriginal population as a problem that had to be resolved.
The answer were to take half-caste children and put them in a white society so they could not inherit the Aboriginal culture, language, tradition, art, dances that was passed from one family member to another.
The government used the excuse that the children were neglected by their parents because they were malnourished. That might have been true, but it wasn't because the children were neglected, it was due to the fact that Aboriginal workers were not paid their full wage.
First of all, the children went through dreadful living conditions. They were placed in institutions where being sexually abused and neglected became part of their daily routine. The loss of identity was progressive, but as soon as they were taken away from their families, they were given Occidental names and they had to adopt the white culture and speak European languages, usually English. Soon, the child would forget his or her roots.
They did not receive a proper education, so when they made their way to the white society, they were penalized and could never have the same opportunities as the whites. Most of them spent their whole lives sharing for their parents and siblings. Some of them, the ones that were taken when they were babies, were not even told where they come from and explained their Aboriginal culture.
Among these children, most suffer from post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety. Most of Australia's suicide came from the stolen generation, and according to HREOC, Aboriginal children were almost taught to reject their culture, so they were unable to retain links with their land. The removal of children had also impacts on the indigenous families. Many parents who suffered their loss turned to alcohol and drugs to escape from their reality, while grief never left others and they could not live without their children. This also eroded the Aboriginal culture that was passed down. There was sadly a big loss of stolen knowledge.
Art. Government actions to reunite the stolen generation families and improvement of the living conditions can be considered as progressive healing. For instance, recently the Picker Art Gallery at Colgate University discovered artwork of child artists from Carolup Settlement School in Western Australia. The children became internationally known thanks to the headmaster of the university. In 2005, the organization Stolen Generations Victoria was created so that they could assist the stolen generation in terms of services and support in their journey of reconnecting with their culture, land, and families. Back in 2006, Tasmania allocated $5 million to the Stolen Generation cause.
In 2009, the compensation was denied in Australia. It was finally in 2015 that South Australia announced a compensation fund worth $11 million for the Stolen Generation members. Sadly, half of the money was directed for in the